Good morning, everyone. Hope you're all doing good. Today we shall be discussing on the biology of tooth movement. As for the learning outcomes, at the end of the lecture, you should be able to describe the physiologic tooth movement, explain the histology of tooth movement, outline the theories of tooth movement, and explain the tissue response in orthodontic force application. Now, coming to the introduction of biology of tooth movement, orthodontic treatment is made possible if prolonged pressure is applied to the tooth. Tooth movement will occur as the bone around the tooth remodels. So this remodeling basically occurs either through osteoblastic or osteoclastic activity. So osteoblastic activity will enable deposition of bone, whereas osteoclastic activity will enable resorption of bone. Also, the tooth moves through the bone, carrying its attachment apparatus with it as the socket of the tooth migrates. Further, the movement of the tooth is mediated by the periodontal ligament, and hence tooth movement is primarily a periodontal ligament phenomena. So there are different kinds of tooth movement. It can be physiologic, it can be pathologic, and it can be orthodontic. Now coming to the physiologic tooth movement, these are naturally occurring tooth movements that take place during and after tooth eruption. So during tooth eruption, there is pre-eruptive, eruptive, and post-eruptive stages. Also, the movement you see in any kind of a migration or drift of teeth, and also the kind of movement you see when changes in the tooth position occur during mastication. So these are all the different examples of physiologic tooth movement. So what happens during a tooth eruption? So we should first go to what is pre-eruptive tooth movement. These are basically the tooth movements happening within the jaws. Okay, as you can see on the image, the tooth has to emerge through different layers to reach its final position. So the movement occurring within the jaw is what is pre-eruptive tooth movement. So these are also the movements which will help the tooth, prepare for its final eruption. So the next stage is the eruptive tooth movement. This is again divided into intraosseous and supraosseous. So the axial or the occlusal movement of the tooth from its developmental position within the jaw to its functional position in the occlusal plane. So that is what is known as eruptive tooth movement. So there are different theories for this tooth movement. It could be through bone remodeling, to the formation of root, vascular pressure theory, and also periodontal ligament traction theory. The third kind is the post-eruptive tooth movement, that is the occlusal and mesial movement, which occurs after eruption and throughout the life of an individual. So this is kind of a compensatory mechanism for the occlusal and the proximal wear, which happens in normal circumstances during the course of a person's lifetime. So to compensate for this, the tooth or teeth will move occlusal and mesially. So that is post-eruptive tooth movement. So when it comes to the migration or drift of teeth, you can see due to any pathological conditions such as proximal caries, there will be some amount of loss of tooth structure. So when there is additional space between the teeth, there is a mesial movement or migration of the tooth. Also, occlusally due to premature exfoliation or absence of opposing tooth. So in such cases, you will see supra-eruption of the opposing tooth. So what happens during the changes in tooth position during mastication? As you all know, the normal force of mastication can be anywhere between 1 to 50 kg, and it occurs in cycles of 1 second duration. So what happens here is teeth will exhibit slight movement within the socket and return to their original position on withdrawal of the force. So if you were to clench and hold your teeth in that position, the teeth will move slightly within the periodontal space, and when you unclench, the teeth are going to move back into their original positions. So when the force is sustained for more than 1 second, the periodontal fluid is squeezed out and you feel pain as the tooth is displaced within the periodontal ligament space. So that is how the teeth move within the available space in the socket, and this occurs mainly through the squeezing out and in of the periodontal fluid. Now coming to the histological changes, one would notice. So the changes vary according to the magnitude and duration of force application. So these changes are either due to mild orthodontic force and changes due to excessive orthodontic force. So we shall go into more details on what changes occur when the tooth is subjected to mild orthodontic force and when the tooth is subjected to excessive orthodontic force in the coming slides. How about the optimum orthodontic force? Is there an optimum orthodontic force? I guess there is. So this force is around 20 to 26 grams per square centimeter of the root surface area. This is also equivalent to the capillary pulse pressure, and hence it is within the physiological norms. So the optimum orthodontic force is the force which moves teeth rapidly in the desired direction with least possible damage to the surrounding tissues and minimal patient discomfort. Okay, so the force with which you can rapidly move teeth in the desired direction with least possible damage to the surrounding tissues and minimal patient discomfort is what is known as optimum orthodontic force, which is around 20 to 26 grams per square centimeter of the root surface area. So, however, if you want to obtain this kind of force, the periodontal fibers must be compressed only to a certain extent, with or little no, with little or no hyalinization. Sorry. So we will discuss what is hyalinization and what causes it and how to avoid that later on. However, what you need to know is optimum orthodontic force should not result in huge areas of hyalinization. So avoiding that will enable faster tooth movement. Also, you should avoid underlying resorption, and also there should be a minimal lag phase. So we shall go into the details of all these in the coming slides. So here is a table which you can remember. How much force is needed to move teeth and how much force is needed to cause different kinds of tooth movement. So what happens when a mild orthodontic force is applied to a tooth? So according to the image here, you can see one side is experiencing tension, the other side is experiencing pressure. So the area which experiences tension is opposite to the direction of the intended tooth movement, and there will be bone deposition. However, the area which experiences pressure is the direction of intended tooth movement, and you will see bone resorption there. So what are the changes occurring on the pressure side? So the pressure side is on the side of intended tooth movement. So once the force is applied, there is compression of the periodontal ligament. There is compression of the fibers of the periodontal ligament. There will be vascular constriction, decreased levels of oxygen. When there is decreased levels of oxygen, there is a cellular response, and also followed by mobilization of fibroblasts and osteoclasts, and then osteoclasts start the bone resorption. So that's how bone is resorbed on the side of the pressure and enables the tooth to move or occupy that newly created space within the jaw. So the newly created space on the side of the intended movement is what is known as frontal resorption. It is seen in the alveolar plate immediately adjacent to the periodontal ligament. And also the resorption occurs at the advancing front. Okay, that is on the side of intended tooth movement. So as you can see the three images, there was pressure applied on the tooth, and then there was all these cellular changes we spoke about taking place in the periodontal ligament space, followed by resorption of bone, that is frontal resorption. So this frontal resorption creates the space for the tooth or the teeth apparatus to move in that direction. So what happens on the tension side when mild force is applied? So the force causes the stretching of the periodontal ligament fibers, leading to increased vascularity and also triggering a cellular response. So here again there is mobilization of fibroblasts and osteoclasts, but on the tension side you will see bone deposition instead of bone resorption. So the fibroblasts will enable the osteoid or bone matrix to be laid down adjacent to the lamina dura, and eventually it will remodel and also reattach the lost periodontal ligament fibers, followed by calcification of osteoid into mature bone. So this slide shows what histological changes happen when a force is applied. So on the tension side, you will see osteoblastic activity and bone deposition. However, on the pressure side, you will see osteoclastic activity and bone resorption. Okay, so on the tension side, there is stretching of the periodontal ligaments, leading to increased vascularity, and then mobilization of fibroblasts, and then bone deposition. However, on the on the pressure side, the same, there is cellular response. However, here osteoclastic activity comes into play, leading to bone resorption. So here is an image showing the extent of changes occurring in different parts of the tooth or the periodontal ligament apparatus. So when there is normal force, what happens? What stretches, how these tissues undergo changes is shown in that image. With mild forces, you will see on the pressure side there is osteoclastic activity. On the tension side there is osteoblastic activity. With extreme forces, the amount of resorption and the amount of deposition is also increased, and thereby affecting certain changes to the movement of teeth. So when the tooth starts moving, there are sites of pressure, there are sites of tension. So the same translates to the alveolar bone as well. So there will be areas of bone resorption and there will be areas of bone deposition within the alveolar bone. So any secondary remodeling changes which are occurring within the alveolar bone to maintain the width and thickness of the alveolar bone in the outer cortical plate is what is known as secondary remodeling changes. These are important so that as the teeth moves, there is enough bone support for the tooth in its new position. So what happens to a tooth when a heavy force is applied? So we shall see what changes occur on the tension side. There will be overstretching of the periodontal ligament fibers, and this will lead to the tearing of blood vessels and subsequent ischemia. So when an extreme force is applied, there is a net increase in the osteoclastic activity when compared to osteoblastic activity. So this will eventually result in loosening of the tooth within its socket. In addition, you can also see some secondary clinical features such as pain and hyperemia of the gingiva when a particular heavy force is applied to a tooth. So what happens on the pressure side? So there's heavy force. So the heavy force again causes crushing or total compression of the periodontal ligament fibers, occlusion of blood vessels. The blood flow is cut off, that is ischemia. So the PDL becomes devoid of nutrition supply, results in necrosis. So once there is necrosis, there is hyalinization, and following hyalinization, the cellular components around that hyalinized zone will be invaded by macrophages and osteoclasts, and they will try to uh, eat their way through the necrotic tissue. So once the necrosed tissue is cleared, there will be resorption occurring in the adjacent marrow spaces and also in the adjacent alveolar plate, which is followed by resorption occurring in the deep areas of the hyalinized area, stretching from the cancellous bone towards the lamina dura of the periodontal ligament. So this kind of resorption is known as undermining resorption. So if you want to move a tooth healthily, we have to avoid undermining resorption because it takes a lot of time for the necrosed tissue to heal and also the hyalinized zone to clear. So it might be as long as 10 weeks and you won't see any tooth movement occurring during this time. So under normal circumstances, you have to avoid applying excessive force so that an undermining resorption does not occur. So we shall now see what hyalinization is. So we were talking about it several times. So now we shall go into a little more details on what hyalinization is. So it is a form of tissue degeneration characterized by formation of clear eosinophilic homogeneous substance free of cellular elements. So it basically denotes a compressed and locally degenerated periodontal ligament. The presence of hyalinized zone indicates that the ligament is non-functional and therefore bone resorption cannot occur. However, this hyalinization is a reversible process, but it's just a matter of time, probably uh, 8 to 10 weeks for it to clear up and then the tooth to again start moving. Before that, what happens is when there is an area of hyalinization, it prevents the tooth from moving any further. That is because since the hyalinized zone is free of cellular elements, there are no osteoblasts or there are no osteoclasts coming into play. So the necrosed tissue has to be removed by the body, absorbed, and then osteoclasts will come in and then start resorbing the adjacent bone. Till this happens, the tooth is not moving or it becomes stationary. Um, Under normal circumstances, any kind of a tooth movement will be met with certain areas of hyalinization. Okay, so you can see the images on the right. If there is a tipping force applied to the tooth, there is an area of hyalinization at the crest of the alveolar bone. If there is the same movement with excessive force, there is uh, hyalinization occurring at two areas, one is at the crest, the other at the apex of the tooth. However, in case of bodily movement, it is occurring at the middle third of the root. So the smaller the hyalinized zone, the faster it heals and the faster the tooth can move. The larger the hyalinized zone, the slower the tooth will move and the slower the hyalinized zone takes for healing. So you have to bear in mind that any kind of an excessive force on the tooth will not result in a rapid movement, but will result in hyalinization, crushing of the periodontal ligament, and degeneration of the periodontal ligament. So this degenerated tissue, unless it is cleared, tooth cannot move further as the osteoclastic activity is completely prevented by the necrosed tissue. So how do you eliminate hyalinization? So this can be usually through the osteoclast differentiating in the adjacent marrow spaces and thereby resorption of the alveolar bone. Also, the cells will invade through the hyalinized tissues and remove the unwanted fibrous tissue by enzymatic action. Usually, it takes around 3 to 5 weeks for the hyalinized areas to be completely removed. Um, Once the hyalinization is removed, osteoclastic activity can start and result in tooth movement. However, you have to bear in mind that hyalinization is usually unavoidable in the initial stages of orthodontic treatment. Also, another point to remember is greater the force, wider the area of hyalinization. So any brutal force you want to apply and you want to see rapid changes, it is going to backfire and it will only lead to the development of bigger areas of hyalinization, which will hinder any kind of orthodontic tooth movement. So we shall leave the histology behind and now come to the theories of tooth movement. So what are the different theories you need to know about? One is the pressure tension theory, the next one is fluid dynamic theory, and the last one is piezoelectric theory. We shall go into a little more details on each of them. So pressure tension theory was put forth in 1932. So whenever a force is applied on the tooth to bring about orthodontic movement, areas of pressure and tension are formed around the vicinity of the tooth. So you've already understood the concept of tension and pressure. So this theory is what uh, told us and introduced us to the pressure and tension concept. So areas of pressure are formed in the direction of intended tooth movement. Okay, it is easy to understand. The intended direction of tooth movement will have areas of pressure. Areas of tension are opposite to the direction of intended tooth movement. The second theory is known as fluid dynamic theory, which was put forward in 1966. And it says that the tooth movement occurs as a result of alteration in fluid dynamics in the periodontal ligament. So the periodontal ligament here is compared to a hydraulic mechanism and a shock absorber. So when there is any force of shorter duration, such as in mastication, the fluid escapes and again is replenished when the force is removed. However, if the force is of a greater magnitude and duration, as you see in orthodontic movement, what happens is the fluid moves out towards the apex and cervical margins, and this causes the blood vessels in the periodontal ligament to get compressed. Okay, and also the principal fibers of the ligament are compressed, leading to stenosis. So this stenosis causes the formation of aneurysms, and this aneurysm actually results in providing a favorable environment for osteoclastic activity. So that is how it affects the movement of tooth. So once there is osteoclastic activity, you know that the tooth can move into that newly formed space. So the third theory is piezoelectric or bone bending theory. Piezoelectricity is a phenomena observed in many crystalline materials. So here there will be deformation of the crystalline structure, which produces a flow of electric current through the crystal lattice. So in the periodontal structures, you will see hydroxyapatite, collagen fibers, collagen hydroxyapatite interface, and also mucopolysaccharide fraction of the ground substance to exhibit piezoelectric properties. So here, when a force is applied to the crystal, there is deformation and followed by displacement of electrons. When there is any displacement of electrons, there is electric current being generated. So this can be either negative or positive. So when a mechanical force is applied to a tooth and then transmitted to the adjacent alveolar process, a small amount of bending of bone occurs. So this eventually will result in the change in the surface electrical charge caused by distortion of cross linkages in the collagen structure of the bone. So this charge uh, is either positive or negative. So the positive and the negative charge have different influences on the surface of the bone. So if it's a positively charged uh, surface, then there is resorption due to the osteoclastic activity. And if it's a negatively charged surface, there is deposition of bone through the action of osteoclast. So it also has an effect on the way the surfaces handle this. So concave surfaces will be negatively charged, convex surfaces will be positively charged. So how does the bone bending theory work? When there is a force, there is some amount of bending of the alveolar bone, followed by deformed lattice, followed by migration of electrons. When there is any movement or migration of electrons, there is piezoelectric current generated, which will signal the cells and activate them, resulting in the remodeling of the bone and eventually leading to movement of the tooth. So now we shall come to the last section of today's lecture. That is, we will now discuss the phases of tooth movement. So there are three kinds of phases. One is the initial phase, the other one is lag phase, and followed by post-lag phase. So what is initial phase and what happens in this phase? Initial phase is immediate, which is seen after the application of force. The tooth movement is very rapid and happens over a short distance and then it stops. The movement of tooth is within the available PDL space. So this kind of movement can be brought about by both light and heavy forces. And the extent of tooth movement seen in this initial phase is 0.4 to 0.9 millimeters. So what happens in the lag phase? So there will be very little or no tooth movement noticed in this phase. That is because of the formation of hyalinized tissue in the BDL. So as you know, if there is an hyalinized tissue, it has to be cleared. The necrotic mass has to be completely absorbed by the body, and then only any kind of osteoclastic activity can start and a resorption of the bone can take place, which can affect tooth movement. So that is not seen here. The duration is shorter if there are light forces being used. So it will result in frontal resorption, which is a good resorption and advantageous for orthodontic movement. However, if the duration is longer, resulting in heavy forces, you will see undermining resorption, which is an unfavorable resorption and prevents any kind of a tooth movement. So this lag phase usually extends for 2 to 3 weeks, but at times can go as long as 10 weeks, depending on the area of hyalinization and how big or how wide the hyalinized zone is. The last phase is the post-lag phase. Here, the tooth movement is rapid as the hyalinized zone is already cleared and the bone has undergone resorption, and the tooth movement can proceed without any hindrance. So with that, we've come to the last slide of today's lecture. So today you've understood what are all the histological changes occurring during orthodontic tooth movement, what is physiologic tooth movement, what are the different changes happening on the pressure side, changes happening on the tension side. You've also known about hyalinization, how to eliminate hyalinization, what is the what is the optimum orthodontic force, and also you know about the different theories of tooth movement. So I encourage you to go through and refer back, and any doubts you can definitely get back to me. So with that, we will wind up today's lecture. Thank you so much for listening.